The delicate strains of a string quartet filled the grand reception hall, their notes weaving a soft, elegant tapestry that underscored the joyous occasion of my cousin Emma's wedding. I stood near the edge of the room, adjusting the hem of my simple navy dress, chosen deliberately to avoid stealing any spotlight from the radiant bride. The dress was understated yet sophisticated, its clean lines reflecting my preference for subtlety over ostentation. My approach to life had always been to blend into the background, to let others take center stage while I quietly pursued my own path. It was a philosophy that had served me well, though it often left me misunderstood by those closest to me. Across the hall, my father, Robert Hartley, held court near the cascading champagne fountain, his perfectly tailored tuxedo accentuating his commanding presence. At 58, he exuded authority, his deep voice and animated gestures drawing a small crowd of business associates who hung on his every word. As the senior vice president of operations at Meridian Industries, the city's largest manufacturing conglomerate, he had built a formidable reputation through decisive leadership and an unyielding commitment to traditional metrics of success: profit margins, market share, and corporate accolades. I watched from afar as he launched into a familiar anecdote, likely recounting last quarter's record-breaking profits for what must have been the 100th time that month. His audience nodded appreciatively, their faces alight with admiration. Beside him stood my mother, Patricia, resplendent in a shimmering designer gown that caught the light with every subtle movement. Her poised smile and perfectly timed nods masked her restless scanning of the room, always on the lookout for more influential connections to cultivate. Networking was her art form, and she executed it with the precision of a seasoned diplomat. Together, my parents were a formidable pair, embodying the polished, high society ideal they had always expected their children to emulate. I took a sip of my wine, the crisp notes of Chardonnay grounding me as I observed the scene. The reception hall was a vision of opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables adorned with fresh orchids and fine linen. Laughter and conversation mingled with the clinking of glasses, creating a symphony of celebration. Yet, despite the warmth of the occasion, I felt the familiar weight of being an outsider in my own family, a quiet figure on the periphery of their world of wealth and status. The clink of a champagne flute drew my attention as my brother Marcus approached, his wife Christina clinging to his arm like a perfectly curated accessory. At 35, Marcus was the embodiment of our parents' aspirations for their only son. His Harvard MBA, vice president title at Goldman Sachs, and sprawling penthouse on Fifth Avenue painted a picture of success that was impossible to ignore. Christina, with her flawless blonde curls and a diamond necklace that sparkled with every movement, came from a family that owned half of Martha's Vineyard, her lineage as impeccable as her wardrobe. Together, they were a vision of the life my parents had always envisioned for their children. Alex, Marcus said, his voice laced with the teasing condescension that always accompanied my childhood nickname. "I'm surprised you made it. I figured you'd be holed up with that little computer project of yours." His words were light, but they carried the familiar sting of dismissal, as though my work could never measure up to his corporate triumphs. I swirled the wine in my glass, letting his comments slide off me like rain on a polished surface. "Wouldn't miss Emma's big day," I replied evenly, my tone neutral but firm. I had long ago learned to deflect their barbs, to keep my composure in the face of their assumptions. Christina's laugh rang out, sharp and melodic, like wind chimes caught in a storm. "Marcus mentioned you're doing something with technology," she said, her voice dripping with polite curiosity. "How fascinating. Is it profitable?" Her question hung in the air, less an inquiry than a subtle challenge, as though profitability were the only metric that mattered. Before I could respond, my sister Victoria joined our small circle, her presence as commanding as ever. At 32, she was the family's other golden child, a successful real estate attorney married to a renowned surgeon. Her 2 children attended the city's most prestigious private schools, their lives as meticulously curated as her own. "Are we talking about Alex's hobby?" she asked, her tone carrying the same condescending edge I'd heard countless times before. "Mom was saying you're still in that tiny apartment downtown." When are you going to settle down and find a real career? The question was a familiar refrain, one I'd endured for 8 years, ever since I turned down the prestigious consulting position at McKinsey that my father had secured through his connections. Instead, I had chosen to pursue a doctorate in quantum computing, a decision that baffled my family and marked me as the black sheep. They saw my path as a rejection of their values, a reckless gamble on an obscure field they barely understood. What they didn't know, what I had chosen not to share, was that my little computer project had led to a breakthrough in quantum error correction, a discovery poised to redefine computing as we knew it. Nor did they know that 3 months ago, I had graced the cover of Forbes as one of the 30 under 30 visionaries reshaping technology, or that my startup, Quantum Dynamics, had just received a $2.8 billion acquisition offer from Microsoft. I kept my expression neutral, my voice steady. "I'm doing well," I said simply, unwilling to reveal the truth just yet. I had learned long ago that showing my cards too early only invited more scrutiny, more attempts to steer my decisions, more pressure to conform to their narrow definition of success. Marcus scoffed, his champagne flute glinting in the chandelier light. "Living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment isn't what most people would call doing well, Alex." "It's Alexandra," I corrected, though I knew he'd ignore it, as he always did. The conversation was cut short by a familiar booming voice echoing across the room, my father, approaching with a distinguished older man I recognized from the pages of Business magazine. "Jonathan, I'd like you to meet my youngest daughter, Alexandra," my father said, placing a hand on my shoulder with a warmth that felt rehearsed. Jonathan Peton, the CEO of Meridian Industries and my father's ultimate boss, stood before me, his sharp eyes studying me with curiosity. My father paused, and I braced myself for what I knew was coming. "This is my disappointing daughter," he continued, his tone light but laced with the familiar sting of judgment. "Works in some tech thing." The words landed like a quiet blow, their impact softened only by years of practice in masking my hurt. I maintained my smile, extending my hand to Mr. Peton. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Jonathan shook my hand, his grip firm, his gaze intense as though trying to place a fleeting memory. His eyes narrowed slightly, then widened with sudden recognition. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen as he opened what appeared to be a magazine app. "Wait a moment," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Aren't you? Isn't this the quantum computing genius from this month's Forbes?" The air in our small circle seemed to freeze. Jonathan held up his phone, the screen displaying the Forbes cover that had been published 3 weeks prior. There I was, captured in a professional headshot against a backdrop of intricate quantum equations, the headline bold and unmistakable: Alexandra Hartley, the 28-year-old who solved quantum computing's biggest problem. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum of shock that enveloped my family. Marcus's champagne flute hovered halfway to his lips, his hand trembling slightly. Victoria's perfectly composed expression faltered, her mouth falling open just enough to betray her surprise. Christina's grip on Marcus's arm tightened, as though she needed the support to remain upright. My father stared at the phone screen, then at me, then back at the screen, his face drained of color. "That's impossible," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan, undeterred, began reading from the article, his enthusiasm palpable. Dr. Alexandra Hartley, CEO and founder of Quantum Dynamics, the company that developed the breakthrough quantum error correction algorithm that's being called the most significant advancement in computing since the microprocessor. He looked up at me, his eyes alight with admiration. "You're the one who solved the coherence problem." I nodded slowly, my voice calm but firm. "Among other things." "My God," Jonathan said, turning to my father, whose expression resembled someone who had just been struck by lightning. "Robert, do you have any idea what your daughter has accomplished? Her work is going to revolutionize everything from drug discovery to financial modeling to artificial intelligence. Every major tech company in the world is trying to license her technology." Marcus found his voice first, though it wavered slightly. "Alexandra, you never said anything about being successful." I met his gaze, my tone gentle but pointed. You never asked. You just assumed. Victoria, ever the attorney, stepped forward, her mind already racing with practical questions. The Forbes article, when was this published? She asked, her voice sharp with calculation. 3 weeks ago, Jonathan replied when I remained silent. The same week Microsoft announced they were acquiring quantum dynamics for. He scrolled through the article, his finger pausing on the figure. $2.8 billion. Christina let out a small choking sound, her hand flying to her throat. My father's face, already pale, took on a sickly gray hue. My mother, who had appeared at his side as if summoned by the commotion, stared at me with wide eyes. But you live in that small apartment, she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. You drive that old Honda. I live modestly by choice, I replied, my tone measured. The apartment is actually a penthouse, but I prefer simplicity. And the Honda is reliable. I don't need to prove my worth through material possessions. Jonathan, still engrossed in the article, began reading again, his voice carrying a note of awe. Dr. Hartley's groundbreaking work was conducted in near total secrecy, as she preferred to let her research speak for itself rather than seeking publicity. Despite receiving numerous offers from major corporations, she chose to build her own company, maintaining full control over her innovations and their applications. He looked up at my father, his expression a mix of amazement and reproach. Robert, your daughter is one of the most important scientists of our generation. The technology she's developed could solve climate change, revolutionize medicine, transform global communications. He paused, his gaze sharpening. And you introduced her as your disappointing daughter. The question hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Other wedding guests had begun to notice the tension in our corner of the room, their curious glances adding to the weight of the moment. Across the hall, I caught sight of Emma, radiant in her white gown, watching us with a mixture of curiosity and concern. My father opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling to find words. We didn't know, he managed finally. Because you never asked, I said quietly, my voice steady but laced with years of unspoken frustration. 8 years ago, you decided that because I didn't follow your predetermined path, I was a failure. You never considered that I might be building something bigger than what you could imagine. Marcus set down his champagne glass, his hands trembling visibly. The consulting job at McKinsey, he said, his voice hoarse. You turned it down to work on this. I turned it down because I had bigger plans, I replied. Plans that required freedom to think, to experiment, to fail and try again without corporate oversight or family pressure. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her legal mind already calculating. The acquisition, $2.8 billion. What's your percentage of the company? I allowed myself a small smile. I retained 73% ownership when I brought in investors 2 years ago. The acquisition values my stake at approximately $2.04 billion. The number hit them like a tidal wave. Christina swayed slightly, Marcus grabbed the nearest chair for support, and my father whispered, $2 billion. His voice was barely audible, as though the figure was too vast to comprehend. On paper, yes, I said. But the wealth was never the goal. The goal was to solve problems that matter, to push the boundaries of human knowledge, to build technology that could help people. Jonathan Peton, still standing nearby, looked at my father with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and judgment. Robert, how does it feel to know that your disappointing daughter has just become one of the youngest billionaires in the country? The question was deliberate, a pointed reminder of my father's earlier words. I could see him processing not just the shock of my success, but the professional implications. Jonathan was his boss, and he had just witnessed my father publicly dismiss someone who was now, by any measure, more successful than anyone in the room. I'm proud, my father said, though the words sounded hollow, strained by the weight of his earlier mistake. Are you? I asked quietly, my gaze steady. Because 3 hours ago, you were telling Aunt Margaret that you wished I'd at least found a husband by now, since I was clearly incapable of supporting myself financially. My father flinched, the truth of my words cutting deeper than any accusation. Victoria looked mortified, her usual composure shaken. Marcus stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, his earlier condescension replaced by a dawning realization. My mother stepped forward, her voice taking on the smooth, diplomatic tone she reserved for navigating social crises. "Alexandra, we've always been proud of you," she said. "We just didn't understand." "You didn't understand because you didn't try," I interrupted, my tone firm but not unkind. "Every time I tried to explain my work, you changed the subject or suggested I was wasting my time. Every family gathering became an intervention about my life choices." Jonathan, watching the exchange with keen interest, spoke up. "Dr. Hartley, if I may ask, what's next for you?" The Forbes article mentioned that the Microsoft acquisition includes a provision for you to continue your research. I nodded, grateful for the shift in focus. "I'll be heading Microsoft's new quantum research division," I said. "We're working on applications that could revolutionize everything from cybersecurity to medical diagnostics. Plus, I'm establishing a foundation to provide research grants for underrepresented scientists." "Extraordinary," Jonathan murmured, turning to my father. "Robert, I hope you realize what an incredible daughter you have. Her work is going to change the world." The moment was interrupted by the wedding coordinator's voice, calling everyone to gather for the cake-cutting ceremony. As the crowd began to move toward the main reception area, Jonathan lingered. "Dr. Hartley," he said, his tone professional but warm, "I'd love to discuss potential collaborations between quantum dynamics and Meridian Industries. We're always looking for ways to incorporate cutting-edge technology into our manufacturing processes." "I'd be happy to explore that," I replied, "though you'll want to coordinate with Microsoft's partnership team after the acquisition closes." "Of course," he said, handing me his business card. "Here's my contact information." He glanced at my father. "Robert, I'll expect a full briefing on this conversation at our next board meeting. I want to understand how we can position Meridian to benefit from these quantum computing advances." As Jonathan walked away, my family stood in stunned silence, the weight of the moment settling over us like a heavy fog. The reception continued around us, the laughter and music a stark contrast to the tension in our small bubble. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Alexandra, why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me?" I asked, my tone gentle but direct. "Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating, like when I tried to explain quantum entanglement at Christmas dinner and Dad told me to stop showing off?" Victoria, ever strategic, shifted the conversation. "The tax implications of this acquisition, do you have proper legal representation?" I almost laughed, the question so quintessentially Victoria. "I have a team of attorneys from 3 different firms handling various aspects of the deal," I said. "Patent law, corporate structure, international licensing, it's all covered." "But family should help family," my mother said weakly, her voice tinged with guilt. "Family should support family," I corrected. "There's a difference between help and support. You wanted to help me by fixing what you saw as my failures. I needed support to pursue what I knew was possible." My father, who had been silent through much of the exchange, stepped forward, his expression softened by something I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse. "Alexandra," he said, his voice low, "we made mistakes." "I made mistakes. Can we start over?" I studied his face, searching for sincerity. "Dad, I never wanted to shut you out," I said. "I wanted you to trust that I knew what I was doing, even when it didn't look like conventional success." "You let us think you were struggling financially," he said, his tone a mix of confusion and regret. "I let you reveal your true feelings about my choices," I replied. "If you'd only been proud of me after discovering I was wealthy, what would that say about your values?" The truth hung between us, raw and undeniable. My mother looked stricken. Marcus was still grappling with the magnitude of my success, and Victoria's calculating gaze softened slightly, as though she were seeing me anew. "So, what happens now?" Victoria asked, her voice quieter than usual. "Now," I said, "we go watch Emma cut her cake and celebrate her happiness. Tomorrow, I have a board meeting with Microsoft to finalize the acquisition timeline. Next week, I'm giving a keynote at MIT about quantum error correction. And next month, I'm testifying before Congress about the national security implications of quantum computing." I paused, looking at each of them in turn. You're welcome to be part of that life, but only if you can accept that my definition of success might be different from yours. As we walked toward the main reception area, my mother slipped her arm through mine, a gesture that felt both unfamiliar and comforting. "Alexandra," she said softly, "are you happy?" "Really happy?" I considered the question, letting it settle in my mind. "Yes, Mom," I said finally. "I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do." "Then I'm proud of you," she said, and for the first time in years, it sounded like she meant it. The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of congratulations from relatives who suddenly remembered my existence. Business cards from my father's colleagues eager to explore opportunities, and quiet moments of connection with family members who were finally seeing me as I truly was. But the moment that lingered most vividly came near the end of the reception, during a slow, soulful song, when my father pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Not just for tonight, but for years of not seeing what was right in front of me." "I know," I said simply, meeting his gaze. "How do I make it right?" he asked, his vulnerability catching me off guard. "Start by believing in me," I said. "Even when you don't understand what I'm doing, especially when you don't understand what I'm doing." He nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Deal." As the evening wound down, Jonathan Peton found me once more. "Dr. Hartley," he said, his tone warm but professional, "this has been the most interesting wedding I've ever attended. Your father is a lucky man, whether he realizes it or not." "Thank you, Mr. Peton," I replied, smiling. "One more thing," he said, lowering his voice. "I meant what I said about collaboration opportunities. Meridian Industries is always looking to stay ahead of technological curves. Perhaps we could schedule a formal meeting." "I'll have my assistant reach out to your office next week," I said, accepting his card. As he walked away, my father appeared at my side, a new note of wonder in his voice. "That was Jonathan Peton showing genuine interest in working with my daughter's company," he said, almost to himself. "Yes, it was," I replied, a playful edge to my tone. "I'm beginning to understand that I may have seriously underestimated you," he said, a faint smile breaking through. "Just beginning?" I teased, and for the first time in years, his laughter felt genuine, a sound untainted by judgment or expectation. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the tense silences of the past. Instead of the weight of unmet expectations, there was a sense of possibility, a fragile but promising shift in our family's dynamic. My phone buzzed with messages, Marcus asking for lunch to discuss my work, Victoria expressing interest in how quantum computing could impact legal research, and my mother apologizing for taking so long to truly see me. As my driver navigated through the city's glittering lights, I looked out at the skyline, the world I had quietly reshaped from my modest penthouse. Tomorrow, I would return to the work that had always driven me, but for the first time in 8 years, I wouldn't be doing it alone, dismissed by those who were supposed to support me unconditionally. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, it's giving them the chance to be proud of who you are, not who they thought you should be. The Forbes cover was just the beginning. The real revolution was unfolding here, one conversation, one question, one moment of understanding at a time. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.